Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We were just chatting prior to the session that I'm not sure we've done one of these conversations about taking a real professional, solid view of market research. And I'm not talking about necessarily hiring like a huge project, but just that whole process of, even if you're a single entrepreneur and you're running a business, how do I think about the market in a real way and not be skewed by what I think might be right? That's something that we all, I think, have struggled with over time as we think about whatever product or service that we have, and then connecting it to where we should go next, or where we can expand within the country, within even the same types of clients that we have. And that requires a clean, clear break of, okay, now I'm thinking about my product, and now I'm thinking about the market, and how can I make that linkage? And my own opinion about that is that very few people know how to do that. I think probably 80% of people are not very good at marketing, for similar reasons, where it's tough to do that process of product to market, and really think about the market. I'll just double check that he's not in the room, but there was a post earlier today from a fellow, and I guess I'm not, I'm sure I'm going to talk to him about it anyway, but he was talking about something that he is doing online. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, that needs a marketing expert. It's way too close to the product. And everything that I see is all about the product and not about the pain and the need. And undoubtedly, if you go to the Global Chamber website, you can see the same thing, because we have the same problem. This is a common problem. So thank you for attending this meeting today, because there's almost no other issue as important as this, other than, of course, ultimately having a plan, implementing the plan, serving clients in ways that they want to be served, and then building from that. So Dr. Sarita Jackson is based in Los Angeles. She's been helping exporters and other companies expanding for years. And her expertise is just really impressive. I've just been so impressed in just the months that I've known her, on the work that she's been able to do, on what she imparts in meetings like this in terms of knowledge. So I think you're in for a real treat. It is a meeting style. I ask that the audience please mute yourself, and then we will have time for questions at the end as well. And all along the way, feel free to put your information in the chat area. Feel free to put your questions in the chat area, but ultimately, hopefully, you'll be available to ask questions live and in person. Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to the conversation. Please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Doug, for allowing me to share this information about research, which, as you mentioned, a lot of times gets overlooked. I talk about research, oh, no, I already have a product or service, I know my market. And for those of you, I do speak fluent Spanish, so I always use the phrase where a lot of times I will encounter business people and they'll say, ¿por qué yo tengo un tío para allá? Like, I have an uncle over there, just because of some personal familiarity, but not really developing a systematic way of identifying a market. And even if you have a market, because of the familiarity, identifying other markets where you really can globally expand, not just where I'm selling my product in one area. So that's some of what we're going to talk about today. So thank you so much, Doug, and I'm very appreciative for the rest of you who are here for this presentation. So I'm going to talk about what we mean when we say systematic research, what that looks like, and then I would like to open it up to get some feedback, comments, answer any questions that you may have. So I'll go ahead, get started here. Okay. So, all right. So as I mentioned, so we're going to talk about research, but in a customized form, customizing market research for effective global expansion. And I will start out with the cases where people usually come to me, the extreme cases where they may go off and do because you get a lot of that. Okay, this is what you need to do in order to export. This is how you do it. But then the question or the step that they often overlook is, well, is this even the right market? And I've seen where clients will go to a market and it's a lot of trouble. Then they end up coming back trying to find out, well, is this really the market that I should be looking at to consider? But for those, I really want to focus on those who do have an understanding of the importance of research as a first step in the export journey and address some of those pain points. So when I have worked with clients, and I'm thinking of two individual exporters for this particular case, where they either were told in one case, hey, by another advisor, hey, you could go and get all of this information online. You can get this, it's free. And he went off and did that. And I remember when we were talking about going ahead working together, there was a bit of a gap in the time where I wasn't getting as much communication. And that was because he was told, oh, I can go off and get this for free. And he came back and he told me, after 15 minutes of trying to gather data, I just got so frustrated because it was so much. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, what really made sense. And then I never could find the type of information that you showed me. So it was me losing a lot of time. And in the case of another person where I had shared resources with him, and it was the same thing. It was just information overload, a lot of general information, and not really sure how to take that information and have it make sense. So you just have a lot of yarn just all over the place, different colors, and you're not really sure what to do with it. And so the challenges that they face are this data clutter, that there's so much information, and then you're not sure exactly which information is credible. There may be limited sources of information or too many sources of information, again, which leads to this challenge of, well, how do I know what works for me, and then how to navigate that information. So the third point, the inability to determine which information is most important for their particular company. For a small company, will the information really be relevant in terms of developing a strategy for a small company compared to a large company? Not necessarily. A smaller company, there are things that you need to take into account in order to develop the most appropriate strategy based on your size, your strengths and weaknesses, and then that particular product or service. Then not being able to get the information, there's so much information out there, but that really makes sense for the firm. And then the last point, when a lot of companies get these tools, they don't know what to do with it. They don't necessarily have the time to go through it or the training to utilize many of the tools and training. And that's one of the things that I really push because of my background in training in research methodology, analysis, interpretation, and research design. And as a result, by not really having these tools or really knowing what to do, then you have the loss of time, the loss of energy spent trying to get information, go after information. And one other thing that I want to mention, because another area is a lot of times a company, or there's a push for trade shows and trade missions, which are excellent ways of also finding out, learning about a market or potential customers and things of that nature. But not every company has the financial resources to go to every trade show, travel around the world. So with this type of information, it allows them to have a narrow focus in terms of who they're going after without having to spend so much money traveling and spending the energy to do so. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but at least for those that have limited resources, it still gives them the information that they need and more focused information. Then the last thing, and I like this term actually from someone that worked for an ag tech firm that I was working with last year. And one of the things that she said was, we were able to get a lot of information online, but some of it we can tell may not necessarily be up to date, and we're concerned about the blind spot. So where we need help is making sure that we have all of the information, and especially for this particular company, because you're dealing with regulatory matters and compliance, and they wanted to make sure that they did not overlook anything and have costly errors later on down the line, which gets to this point here, that as a result of losing time, wasting energy, some cases a company just will not move at all, not make any progress, but they still have their idea that I want to expand globally, but because they're not sure exactly what to do, what that research should look like, they end up not really making the progress they should, or if they overlook those blind spots, wasting a lot of money, and money in the sense of any kind of regulations, any fines or whatever, by not necessarily being compliant, depending on that product again. So especially if you're in the food space, there are a lot of regulations that you have to understand when importing or exporting. Just using the US as an example, bringing food products into the US, there are a number of regulations that you have to follow, be aware of before bringing that food product into the United States. And if you don't follow those, if you are not in compliance, well, then that can be very costly later on down the line. So trying to cut corners on the front end can really cost you on the back end. So then the question becomes, well, how do we turn this data overload into a useful starting guide? And so this is just a 4-step process that I use with working with companies. But the step number 2 is the main thing that we're going to focus on today. But before I even get to the first step, I often work with companies, and as a part of that research is really doing an internal review of the company, so that once the customized market research comes together, that we have a clear understanding of the company's capabilities. And the reason why that is important is because when developing a strategy based on research, you don't want to propose recommendations or a strategy that may not necessarily align with that company. A company may not necessarily have the resources to implement that strategy, and then we will be back where we were, just the previous 2 slides here, where they end up not moving altogether. And we want progress. Okay. So by doing an internal review of the company, then we can say, okay, are you really ready to go? And if so, then how can we make sure you have a competitive strategy to compete in the market that we identify in the second step, identifying the right market for your particular product or service. And it doesn't have to be the biggest market. That was one of the things that I often encountered, especially when I first started GRIT in 2013. I would talk to small business owners, mid-sized companies. And at that time, for Asia, I want to do business in China. For Latin America, I want to do business in Brazil, because at that time, that was when Brazil's economy was still doing pretty much okay. And then previous years, Brazil's economy was a fast-growing economy. So at that time, that's why there was such an emphasis on Brazil. And I would ask them, well, how did you come to the conclusion? Why? And that was just because that's what they heard. And I would indicate to them, well, do you realize there are a lot of regulations, regulatory barriers, tariffs, a lot of costs that you need to take into account to enter that market? And many of those companies were unaware, hence the importance of market research that guides the 3rd step of our strategy, and then number 4, connecting with trusted advisors to implement that strategy. Okay. So why is research important for effective global expansion? Well, it saves that company time and money so that they can invest that time and money back into their business. Then it also allows them to mitigate the risks that I talked about that are associated with making costly errors. So by mitigating those risks, reducing the risks, then they can save their money. Again, that can be used to grow their business, as well as to generate revenue. generate the revenue by expanding globally and doing it as well as you can the first time, and then whatever that revenue is to invest back into your business and grow the business globally. So let's look at what some of that looks like. So I have several levels. With research, with the market identification, I start at the country level. The country level, then we'll get into the firm and the product level. Product or service for that matter. This is also applicable to service providers, but I focus on goods mainly since a lot of times when I'm giving talks, it's people that are manufacturers, agricultural producers, or where they're working with clients producing a tangible good. So with this, there are some simple resources. I'm simplifying here because again, sometimes you can go to the resources, and if you're not necessarily used to using them, it may not be as simple as it should be. But with market identification, when I work with companies or when I'm giving training or encouraging anyone to look for the type of information, the first thing that we start off with is their particular product and narrowing it down, not getting information about an industry in general. For example, one of a company that I worked with where he went after information, it was for food and beverages in its entirety. And he still was confused because he says, well, this is the product that I'm producing. I'm bringing in these seeds from West Africa. This is the type of product that a healthy food snack. So I'm not sure what to do with all this information about food and beverages in market X, whether that's Mexico or any other market. It's narrowing it down to how is that product classified. So we start with the harmonized system code, which really breaks down each product. So you can have, foods, the different types of foods, the meat, the specific types of meat, fruits and vegetables, apples, broccoli, whatever. And then even within those categories, there are even more micro levels on those particular products that you have to understand. So the first step is making sure that your product is classified properly. And that's where working with the customs broker comes in. There's a harmonized tariff schedule that for the United States is published online, and many other governments where they've published their harmonized codes as well. And these are codes where they are 2, 4, 6, 8, up to 10 digits that you have to make sure that that product is classified properly. The reason being is because that product classification also allows you, if you are, which I'll talk about, you see on the end here, the far right column, where I talk about trade agreements. And one of the things when I talk to businesses that may not necessarily have the resources to deal with a lot of regulatory barriers, tariffs or taxes placed on their goods, to take advantage of those markets where their country has signed a trade agreement with another country. But under those agreements, you have to make sure that your product is eligible, it is classified properly to take advantage of those trade agreements. And what the benefit is that a lot of times any tariffs are eliminated, which allows for savings for importers and exporters to have a competitive advantage because those tariffs aren't placed on their goods, or duties aren't placed on their goods. So it's very important to make sure that that product is classified properly. If not, then yes, there can be some consequences, costly consequences, by not properly classifying that good, and to make sure that it originates in a member country and aligns with, follows the rules of the trade agreements or trade programs. Okay, so that's the first step. Then when identifying markets for your product or service, to look at, well, which countries are importing these products from my country? I'll give you an example. One of my very first clients, when I started Grit, came to me. He was from the Gambia in West Africa, and he did business with the Gambia and Senegal, but his product, he really wasn't making he wasn't really profiting, for that matter. And he was generating some revenue, but he wasn't turning a profit. And so when I met him, it was actually a social, and I described what I did, and he says, you know, I really need help because I've been in this business for years, and I'm only exporting to these countries because that's what I know, but I'm not really making the profit. I'm open to identifying other markets, but I don't know how. And this was the process that I followed with him on looking at, well, what other countries are importing his particular product from the United States? What are the top 3 to 5 countries, showing the dollar value, the weight, which you see in the next 2 columns, so that he can get a sense of at least where to start. The other bit of information that is very important is also for sustainability, to look at the growth rate over a period of time. Usually I look at about a 4-year period to make sure that this is a market where you don't want to go to a market where you see growth 1 year and then all of a sudden it drops off the next year. To really see what are those trends over a period of time. For me, I think a 4-year period is a pretty good measure to see what that percentage of growth is, and use that in your calculation in terms of identifying markets. Also, the tariff rates that I just talked about, which are those taxes placed on goods going into another country. And when I talk to small businesses, that's where I really start. Why not look at those countries where there is 0 tariff placed on your good? Because it gives you, now there are a whole host of other factors for competitive advantage, I know that, but at least if we're just looking in terms of tariffs, this is a starting point, because then the importer, the person that's bringing in that good, is saving money, not having these tariffs or really high tariffs placed on that good. And starting with some of the countries where we have signed a trade agreement or a trade program is put in place. And some of this information just for US companies, the US Department of Commerce has a lot of data, the US Census Bureau, those are the 2 main ones, just the starting point for finding some of this information. Okay. Then the level 2 is the firm level buyer analysis. And this really, the reason why I really like this, and many of the companies have found this very valuable, is because we are moving away from what's going on between 2 countries now to transactions between importers and exporters. And not only that, but it's up to date, not quite real time, but up to date. So when I'm collecting this information, it is even as recent as yesterday, as opposed to looking at some data from December of 2021, even though we're in March, that's outdated. Even something a month ago is outdated because of so many changes. So with the firm level buyer analysis, that's where with working with companies, now you know, okay, well, here's my market, but then who's actually buying my particular product? And that's where I'm able to go in and say, hey, well, this is just one example of a company that's based in Georgia that was actually, and this is giving the example not of US exporters, but now for exporters from other countries wanting to come to the US, where I can say, hey, well, here's a list of active buyers of that particular product. This is just one particular buyer, a top buyer, and we can see where that company is located. Now, there's way more information, the contact information, so on and so forth, but for the sake of this example, you just see, here is the name of the company, and then the company is buying from these circles here on the outside. Those are shortened names of actual companies coming from, these are companies based in Mexico. So you know, oh, well, here is a buyer of bananas, and they're buying from these countries, these companies from Mexico, and this is how much they're buying. And then also you can dig deeper to find out, well, how often is this company based in Georgia buying this product? What periods of the year do we see where they're both active? And that information is used to say, for a company to say, okay, well, this is a company maybe I should reach out to and see if I can position myself to sell my product to that same company. How do I distinguish myself from my competitors, because we're all selling bananas. Okay, so that's a level there. Then another level is the competitor analysis. So as you see from both, this is not just here's a list of companies that are buying and here's a list of competitors and let's do internet searches. No, this is really using a subscription-based databases as tracking all of the movement of these different types of goods and from different countries, so on and so forth, and being able to pull that information for the buyers, as we just saw on the previous slide, and then for the competitors, where let's say here's a Mexican company that wants to export bananas to the US. We can take the last 2 days and see, all right, well, who is actually, which companies, other banana producers in Mexico, how much are they actually exporting to the United States? And we can see here, there are several different companies that are exporting just on March 29th alone, exporting to the United States. And that gives us a sense of, okay, well, not only who are my competitors, but what's the activity? How are they performing in terms of getting their goods into the US market? And then that's usually aligned with the buyer analysis. So it gives us a deeper view of both the buyers and the competitors than what you would get if you're going around trying to talk to one over here, one over there. That's time consuming, takes a lot of money and a lot of energy. So at least this gives you a starting point to have a more focused approach when connecting with buyers, or at least knowing who your competitors are. Okay, then the level 4, depending on the scope of the research, but then of course gets into some of the other things that are regular parts of any kind of research, looking at the free trade agreements or trade agreements, trade programs that I talked about, such as the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, formerly NAFTA. When it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, we have the African Growth and Opportunities Act, or AGOA. So understanding some of those different types of agreements and what are the advantages for an exporter to different types of markets. And then also, even if you're doing business with other countries where they already have a regional trade bloc, for example, the Southern Common Market or Mercosur in South America, then you have to understand, okay, what do I need to understand if I'm going to trade with a country that's a part of that regional trade bloc? Demographics, industry trends and forecasts, doing the pestle analysis, looking at kind of the macro environment of a market, your political environment, in economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. Understanding consumer behavior, regulations, and compliance. So those are other things that also go into the research. And then, okay, as we wrap up, just going back to the 2 cases that I was talking about, where 2 gentlemen had come to me and I worked with them. One I still monitor, because I believe in not just giving them a deliverable or a report, but also monitoring their activity to see how are they doing with this information. So in the case of one gentleman who is bringing in seeds from Côte d'Ivoire, or the Ivory Coast, to manufacture into a healthy snack product for him, after working with me, well, he was saying that he's been able to go from not knowing how to get started to having a clearer picture, being more clear and organized with an 18-month roadmap and timeline on, okay, so now you know, for him, it's coming to the US market. So trying to understand the US market using some of the firm level buyer and competitor analysis that I've just described, and then also how to navigate the market. And so giving him an 18-month roadmap on what to do, and then a timeline, which is that 18 months, what he needs to do within the 18 months to accomplish his goal. And he found that it saved him a lot of time and money. He's already been bringing his seeds into the United States, identify a partner that he can work with so that he can turn those seeds into this healthy food snack to sell in the United States, and starting mainly with the Los Angeles and Southern California area. And then the next step is to begin the manufacturing process. So that is it. And here's my information to connect. And now I look forward to opening it up to questions and answers and a discussion.
Woohoo, that's great. Hey, great information. Awesome. I don't see any questions in the chat area, so let's just open it up to all of you. Right now, I think you're all muted. So I welcome any of you to either raise your hand or to just unmute yourself and move forward. Who would like to go first? Don't be shy. Larry, undoubtedly you have a question or a comment because you've been doing this for so long.
I have, Doug, and what Sarita has told us has been extremely valuable. And I'm going to be talking with her later this week or next week, and I'm looking forward to that conversation with her. I thought this presentation was just outstanding, and every point she raised is absolutely valid, particularly for small and medium-sized companies. And that's where the issues lie. A lot of small businesses just don't have the resources to do the proper kind of market research that Sarita has described and what needs to be done. And understanding that market research is also critical. You can delve into numbers and what they tell you, particularly with US government data. It's a look in the rearview mirror. It's not telling you what's coming ahead in the next several months. And in my area that I deal with, mostly consumer goods, and particularly textiles and apparel, where style and trends are so important, you use the market research as a starting point. But it also, you need to add a little bit of entrepreneurship and a little bit of educated guesswork to tell your clients what's likely to happen going forward. It's critical to understand what happened looking backwards and what's happened in the past to give you an idea of how well your product may do in that market. But going forward, it requires a little bit of guesswork, and you got to have the market research, as Sarita just described, as your starting point. Because if you don't start with that, you're not going anywhere.
Agreed. What do you have any comments to that, Sarita?
No, I agree with Lawrence 100% because yeah, and the part that he mentioned too that really stands out that I mentioned briefly, didn't get into too much detail, but like you said, as opposed to information where we're looking in the rear view mirror, also having a system to understand, well, what are we going to encounter? We're driving our car, what's ahead of us so that we don't crash. And that's where really getting the forecast, the insights and the forecast so that you can prepare yourself, but also being flexible, right? Because especially within the last 2 years where you see things can change so quickly. And that's why it's so important to work with someone that stays on top of all of these trends. Like I'll give you a story. This is a story an example that I always like to share. Now, it's not necessarily about the numbers, but it's making sense of the numbers and making a story that makes sense for the company, but also the policies. That's the area that I come in. I'm all about understanding the trade policies. And why is that? Because I remember when I started this, Larry, you're in the DC area. So I'm so familiar with the whole Washington, DC environment. I moved back to Los Angeles. It's a totally different conversation. It's more about the logistics and transportation. But when I would talk about policy, it was kind of, I didn't get too many takers on it until, you know what happened? 2016, and we all know what happened. When there was a talk about all of these tariffs, bringing manufacturing back, and so many different things that have happened, especially for those that were doing business with China, when they were affected by the tariffs, then they could understand, oh, that's what she means by policy, because as I argue that the policies impact what happens in the international trade community. So staying abreast. So the example that I was going to give is I remember there was a young lady that wanted to set up a company here in the United States. She was from South America. And I was talking about this what's called a generalized systems of preferences, which is a program where the United States will allow exporters from eligible developing economies to send their goods to the United States, no duty. So that gives them access to the US market. And then for the importer, you don't have to pay those duties. Well, at that time, the GSP had expired. And here she goes again. She says, oh, I could use this program to import from the South American country. And I said, well, you know, I gave her a quizzical look, and she said, wait, I thought you knew all of this. I said, I do. I still don't know how you're going to make this work. Someone told her that she could take advantage. I said, the reason why I am giving you this look is because it expired a year ago. We're still waiting for US Congress to reauthorize it for another 10, 20 or so years. Oh, you know what I mean? So that's where having someone that really stays on top of these trends, because could you imagine if she thought I can save money, import from an eligible generalized systems of preferences or GSP country, and find out, no, you can't? There we go, waste of time, money, and energy. So so the comment that was made, I agree 100%. And then also I'm just throwing in also being aware of the policies. It's not just something that the politicians are talking about, but this is what has an impact, whether it's at your domestic government level and even at the World Trade Organization, the WTO. Those are things, and you know, and a business person is not going to follow that, but that's what I do. So that I can let you know, well, here are the opportunities, here are some challenges and things you need to be aware of so that you can expand and compete in the global market.
Great, thank you. There are a couple things that came out of that conversation between the two of you, and I've got some backup questions, but I see there's a question from Ruby. What types of market research can new exporters do? And Ruby, feel free to elaborate and follow up as well.
So, okay, so in terms of the new exporters, what kind of research that they can do? So basically with the new exporters, I think starting with the country level slide that I showed, they don't need to get all into the granular stuff because they're not quite there yet. But for a new exporter, just really understanding the trends. So that's where just kind of, okay, well, what are the top markets for my product? A lot of that information is available. Understanding the programs or trade agreements that they could take advantage of. I usually just stop there because, you know, with new exporters, the fact that they're even getting to that point is a good thing, right? Because it can be so overwhelming, and then it's, oh my goodness, no, it's just too much. But just starting there with just understanding the trends for their particular product or service, looking at different markets, and then also looking at the programs or the trade agreements that will give them a competitive advantage in any given market around the world.
Okay, got it. Ruby, did that answer your question? And or any follow-ups that you'd like to make?
Yeah, it does indeed, and thank you for that. The other question I've got is, you know, market research is one of our core business services that we provide, and we tend to get a lot of requests from European countries, you know, Germany, especially UK. We get a lot of market research because I don't know, but they appreciate market research before they even start, you know, any business in any country. But I don't know, from your experience, do you get a lot of US companies asking for market research? Because I'm yet to get one. And so I just wanted to know why we are not getting much from the US, but from other markets. Yeah.
That is an excellent question, Ruby, because that is one of the challenges even the US researchers are dealing with. First, for many US companies, it's just really getting them to think globally in the first place. So as Lawrence knows, with the statistic that comes out of the US Department of Commerce, that less than 1% of US companies are even exporting. Wow. So that's one of the things, but one of the strategies when it comes to US companies, helping them to understand the opportunities in the export market, valuing the research, not just doing things, starting the process, but really valuing the research. And that's my whole mission. And the way that I've been able to address that and get a few, if I can at least get one person in the audience, and actually the two cases that came from me just being in a room talking about it. So really going to them, because they're not going to come to me. It's going to be, I can go online, I can do these internet searches, rely on secondary information that may or may not be useful. So I've had to really go to them. And in the case of the one that was told he could go online, that I told the story about, I remember when I met him, it was in a big room, and he was, research, I don't know, I don't think it's important. Well, he found out, and then I ended up working with him once he established his company. So it's that mentality of first trying to understand exporting, and then valuing doing the research, realizing, look, the World Wide Web really does not have everything in the world on it. There are so many other resources. So I've just had to go to the small businesses by collaborating with organizations such as the Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration, and other organizations to provide the training and workshops. And as I said, if I could just get one person get one convert, I've done my job. But yeah, you're experiencing what we are experiencing here as well in the United States.
Thank you.
Yep. Is part of the issue that they don't know which country, so they don't know who to go to? Is the path to get information that they're looking for too complicated? I mean, it seems like they should just contact you as a starting point.
Yeah, because I simplify it for them. It doesn't have to be so complicated. Now, when they get the information, like when I'm looking at the data, well, I'm trained in looking at raw data. Now, not all of it's raw, but like if I really want to get granular, I'm looking at raw data. I can get through it much quicker, make it make sense. But if it's just the data overload that I described earlier, then yes, it gets overwhelming. And then there's also, in some cases, the fact that, well, companies are saying, well, I'm already doing well in the United States. The United States is big enough. So why do I really need to go to this other market? So there are different mentalities and mental hurdles that you have to get over to convince companies to really take advantage of some of the opportunities. And one spiel that I do use, and I remember hearing a company, he wasn't my client, but I remember hearing a gentleman talk about this, where with a lot of research shows that even in times of crises, it's the exporters that outperform those that aren't exporting. And to hear this gentleman, it wasn't just the statistics, but to hear him say, because I had started exporting to Canada right before the Great Recession, that's what kept me afloat. So it's just really trying to simplify it as much as possible. But I think, again, it's really going to those companies and then following them along the journey, not just here's the information. I think this is my personal opinion. I think that's where we fall short, that it's just, here's the information, go off, good luck, and then come back and let us know if you're exporting. And I would notice that. And that's why for me, when I work with a client, even after the deliverable, I'm always checking in, hey, what's going on? What's going on? And is there anything that I can do? So I'm still there for you. And then that will result in them following through on the process, as opposed to just, here's information, we've given you this workshop, and then just expect you to go off and do. Okay.
So the plan, do, check, act cycle of continually learning from what you've implemented and then adjust. So that's a great point. How does somebody then get to Ruby? So if you're an American in, Texas somewhere, and, they think Africa is the market, they probably wouldn't. They'd probably find you or someone like you first, right? And then how would you work with Ruby wouldn't maybe in the case of Ruby, where she's in Ghana, it would be a US company maybe in Kenya who would say, hey, I've had some success there, maybe accidental export or something like that.
Mhm.
Maybe I should be looking at some other countries like Ghana or West Africa, and then they come to Ruby. Like how does what you do that seems to be more broad interact with people that are experts like Ruby around a particular region?
Mhm. So then that's where I would collaborate with Ruby.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, she would be my on the ground contact. So I would say, here are the opportunities in Ghana, but Ruby has the rich information. She's got the real deal in Ghana. So I would connect them with her, quite frankly. I'd say, okay, well, yeah, Ghana's a good market. Now we want you moving, so let me connect you with someone who, like Ruby, who also does research and can provide even more information about the Ghanaian market and work with that company. That's pretty
Okay.
much what it would be.
And Ruby, in your case, are you focused in on Ghana, or do you handle the Gambia and kind of that whole West Africa region or beyond? How do you relate to the process?
Wow. So we don't provide support just in Ghana. It's across Africa. I quite remember in 2020 we did a work for a member of Greater Manchester Chamber in the UK, and they were looking at various African countries, and we actually did a piece of work for them in DRC, South Africa, Zambia, and Namibia. And guess what? We are not locally there, but we have partners on the ground that we collaborate, and they, collect all the data, and then we put it together and package it for the client. So it's doable. It doesn't matter wherever people are looking to explore new markets in Africa. We can always get the work done for them. We just need to understand what the objective is, what they want to achieve. And once we have those clear understanding, we just go on the field and then get the work done.
Okay, fantastic. We have about 10 minutes left, and so we'll keep taking questions up to the end. I see one from Mona, and feel free, Mona, to unmute yourself as well. I'll read it and then feel free to follow up. What is the cost involved in market research? And so what flexibility and what thoughts do you have there, Sarita, regarding how people should consider the cost side of things?
Oh, excellent question, because that's also an issue that comes up. It depends on the scope of the project. It really does depend on the scope of the project. So one of the things that I do, I've just been in talks the last week with several companies outside of the US, from South America, and then now starting one with East Africa. And, so I have different options, and that one company was very appreciative of it. They had gone to my website and really looked at it before they even reached out to me. So I felt really good about that. But the cost, I offer a variety of different levels of research. So you don't necessarily need a full extensive package, because I'm just going to be frank, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. Not everybody has that. I'm a small business owner, so I understand myself, limited resources. So one of the things with this company that they appreciated, they said, oh, could you just kind of send us the range, because we can break it down. You might just be at a position, going back to Ruby's question, if I'm new to this whole exporting thing and I just want to identify markets, similar to the gentleman that I described with the Gambia, I can just do something for a little under $1,000 just to identify those markets for you and get into the trend. And then if you want a bigger, more comprehensive, that's where we get into the firm level type data, the buyer, the competitor analysis. So I offer them individually, depending on the goals and objectives of that company. And then if they really want the comprehensive, and I've had a number of that, just the full package, so that I get all of this information up front, then they get that as well. So it's different types of research that's involved. It's broken down, as well as, in addition to the research, if you want connections, things like that. And then it also depends on if I have to bring in a team For example, and I'm only giving just when it comes to regulations, that can be costlier because you really want to make sure that you have it right. So with a company that I was dealing with last year, it got into, this is the ag tech firm, a lot of regulations. So I had to bring in consultants, attorneys, but not just people that were generalizing, but who knew the ins and outs because they had worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or in this case, also the EPA needed to be involved, the Environmental Protection Agency. So it depends on the scope of the project, but there are, fees that are suitable for someone that's just getting started.
Okay. So, and Mona, I muted you, sorry, because there was some noise. Did you have a follow-up question to that? Because I have a follow-up.
No, I just wanted to know the levels of it. And I just have one small question which Sarita can answer. This we are talking about trade like export and import. Can we do some research on services like travel? Because for example, like I'm really desperate to know like what people are looking at post-COVID as to what are the services that they are looking at. Not only travel, but what involves in that particular travel. For example, they travel to Africa, or they travel to Far East, or they travel to the Indian subcontinent. What exactly are they looking at? Are they looking at expansion of business, or they're looking at pure leisure? They just want to do some research in the country. I mean, how do I find that out? I mean, can this be done by a market research person?
Including myself. Okay. Because really services, that is such an area that's so ignored. And I do research on services. I published a book last year on services because many of these workshops focus on manufacturers, and I started noticing, wait, but we have more service providers in the room. They may have questions. And then that's how I got into international trade from a practical perspective, the academic side, but from a practical perspective, I'm traveling around the world providing what? The service. So yes, so I do research on, and a lot of times if I have way more time, then I do have a section on how do you, if you're a service provider, find out what's going on. And when we're talking about services, the professional services, like you said, with the tourism, transportation, business, financial services, even legal services. So a lot of times I do talk to service providers in those areas to say, even with trade agreements, there's a whole section on services that you can take advantage of. And here's the data to show what are the top markets for services, what's happening within those different types of services. So yes, that's another area that I focus on as well.
Okay, great. The kind of the follow-up question, one of them on that is, so somebody like Mona who has a product or service that could be anywhere in the world, there's some things she's already thought about. So she comes to you saying, gee, I don't have $10,000 or don't want to spend $10,000 on this, but I have maybe, some amount of money, but I'd like certain types of information and I don't exactly know. Is that then a process where they come and tell you kind of, here's where we are, here's our business, and you customize the solution to them, both what they need and to their budget?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I find that very important because my mission is to get people exporting. So whatever I can do to work with them that aligns with their budget, what their objectives are, and then, finding what will work just to get them started. Absolutely.
Okay. Do you sometimes get them off to say, well, here's some things I can do with that budget, and then maybe here's some things you can do to research and go somewhere? I mean, does it kind of end up a team effort? I love your approach because it feels very global, very flexible, very, very workable, because your mission is to help people, and
Right.
Not everybody has like that $10,000 check to throw at you, and that's not always the right solution either.
Exactly. And let me just say one thing too. There have been times, for example, the client from Cote d'Ivoire, I did this very same thing. He came to me and I just said, you really don't need me right now. He was ready. I said, you know what? I just don't feel good doing that. I said, you really don't need me. Here's some resources. Here are, different resources that you could tap into. It wasn't until I followed up a year later that he was ready to go, because he had utilize all those resources, and it only took him so far. So yeah, so in terms of if someone's not ready or what have you, then yeah, I do say, well, here are some resources that you could tap into that are either less expensive or just outright free. Some complimentary resources, because here for the US companies especially, and even if you're overseas, because you have the commercial services, right? They're all over, where I usually will refer them there to say, look, here are some advisors that work with the government that can guide you, where they do business guides and things like that, just to at least get you started. And you can get some basic level of information. So I do work in that fashion.
We've only got a couple minutes left and we'll wrap up. So we're going to cut the questions off at this point. If you have a question, please type it in the chat or just send it in to info@globalchamber.org, and we're happy to handle it. I'm wondering, in closing, I'd love to have you make a closing statement and cover anything either that you felt like you either missed or would like to reemphasize. But I do have a couple kind of integrated questions in that. One came out of your conversation with Larry, and that is, you run into people with certain mindsets, right? This is what I believe. And the market research often says something different, right? Or even like probably when they talk to you initially, they have a certain idea, like this fellow from Cote d'Ivoire who says, I need market research. Well, now that I've listened to you, actually you don't. And so tell us more about what you do when you get people off whatever ledge they're in. They're about to jump off the ledge and make a bad mistake, but they're committed to that mistake. How do you get them to stop that? That's a common problem. And then somewhat in a related way, one of the things with business, right? You're always changing your focused best customer. At the beginning, like everybody seems like a customer. Then as you learn, you focus to the point where, like, even forever, you're always focusing because you want to make more money. How do you get people into that mindset from everybody's my customer to here's my best who I'm looking for, and then next year it could be even tighter or different? How does that happen? So both of them are kind of overcoming mental right predispositions by whoever you're working with. And then please make any final comments.
Okay, so in terms of those that come and they have their idea and they're stuck to the idea, well, quite frankly, I mean, because those are two questions, to me, two different questions, because I've done that where now it's not just target market, but my best client, this is what the client looks like. So quite frankly, if someone comes and they're just really stuck with an idea, and I will probably provide something complimentary to show, hey, this may not work for you. That's one way. Another way, and well, this was a client, they didn't have that kind of mental block, but what was helpful was when I connected them with someone in my network, he was able to say, a customs broker, you probably aren't quite ready, or the direction you're going in might not necessarily work. That helps. However, if they're just really just stuck with that idea, regardless of everything, then, because I've narrowed down the best clients, then I just have to politely say, then maybe this is not for you. Because, you walk into the trap of, no matter what you do, if it doesn't go with what they want, whether it makes sense or not, or isn't a really benefit to them or not, I just basically say, well, maybe you need a little bit more time. I don't, it's not much I can do to take them on as a client. They pay the money, and then I'm not providing what they kind of, how they say, do you want me to tell you the truth or what you want to hear? Well, I'm going to tell you the truth. If you just want me to say what you want to hear, then grit is just not for you. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Steph. Oh, and let's see. And then any just wrap up comments, I guess, because we're right at time. I guess, the main thing is really, just for companies, if we all can encourage companies to really don't ignore that very first step before you start learning what you need to do, how you need to do it. First, get to the why. How do I get there, and why am I doing what I'm doing? And so that's where the research is, and really take the time and invest in that, because it really can save you so much time, energy, and money down the line. And then Mona's question, just want to reiterate that services, that we also need to take into account services, and I do focus on what service providers can do to expand globally as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Just put your information in the chat area. It doesn't look like I sent the email address, but go to the website. There's the phone number. And if you can't find Sarita's email, we can definitely help with that as well. Such an important topic. Thank you for introducing this this year for Global Chamber, and undoubtedly we'll have more to go on this. What's next for you? Do you have some events coming up? What's the rest of your year look like in terms of things that you're involved with?
So, well, one of the things in terms of events that I've started doing as of February is where I'm bringing producers, manufacturers, service providers from all around the world to have these conversations, but with the idea of solving some of the problems, the challenges when it comes to exporting. So the next one is April 28th. It's usually the fourth Thursday of each month. So many of you, I think, yeah, we're already connected on LinkedIn. A few more, I'll go ahead and connect with you on LinkedIn, and you'll have that information. But we've been having some really good sessions with people from all around the world where we actually take a challenge and break it down and then come up with some action items, and where we're all held accountable. So that's one of the things that I've started doing. It's complimentary, and it gets the producers, service providers talking and addressing some of these challenges and out of our silos. So that's one of the things I've been so excited about. Yeah.
I see is it under your events section of the website?
It's not on the event. This one hasn't been mentioned as of yet. Okay. Yeah, it's been mainly promoted on the GRIT LinkedIn page, but I will put the next one on the events, on my events page as well.
Fantastic. I'll take a look there, and what we'll probably do is send out a post, kind of a post event today with a link to that as well. Okay. If it's on the GRIT page, we can find it.
Sounds good.
Thank you for taking the time, and thank you all for taking the time today to listen to Dr. Jackson talk about such an important topic. Thank you for sharing also about the April 28th event, and for all of you, please stay engaged, get involved on topics that are of interest to you. This week, we have still a number of conversations that are due to happen, including tomorrow around this time. I think this time minus 3 hours, we are doing business in Ukraine. And we've got not only an ex-aide to President Zelensky, but we have members in Ukraine who will be talking about what's going on, how you can help, how to keep business flowing, et cetera. So thanks again, Dr. Jackson. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.